Socrates was a Brazilian footballer who captained the Brazil national team in the 1982 World Cup, but most famously known as the hero of the Corinthians Football Club and an icon in Brazilian football history. Socrates once told the Corinthians supporters, "I want to die on a Sunday, the day Corinthians win a title." He died on 4 December 2001. On the same day, Corinthians became the champions of Serie A. It was Sunday. And fans did not forget their hero Socrates on that day. A special person in Corinthians football history, and fans remembered how much Socrates meant to them. And it's not just because of his footballing career or his talent or on-pitch success or performances. His influence was much bigger than that, reaching beyond football. It inspired and impacted not only Corinthians fans or Brazilian football, but the entire nation. His personality, football career, and lifestyle were quite different from what you would expect from a big name. Socrates had a privileged upbringing. His father was a revenue secretary and very fond of books, which passed on to Socrates as well, along with a good education. He even went to medical school, got a bachelor's degree in medicine, and was ready to start practicing as a physician. Football was a pastime for him, despite his talent, which was visible from quite early. When initially approached by Botafogo Football Club, he declined their offer to focus on becoming a doctor instead of a professional footballer. But destiny, it seems, had other plans. Botafogo were adamant about not letting him go so easily. They gave him an option to only play and not train so he could continue his college. Both parties agreed to this arrangement. Socrates was playing for the first team and continuing his studies, but he was still catching everyone's eyes with his performances. Socrates, despite his unconventional ways, became Botafogo's talisman. And for this, the club ignored many of his activities, like drinking, smoking, and partying, in addition to their agreed arrangement for exemption from training. Socrates was a dynamic player, originally an attacking midfielder who could play anywhere in attack and even as a centre forward. No matter where he played, he was always a goal threat. He was elegant and very effortless in the way he played. His ability to read the game was exceptional, and that too in a time where physical attributes and work rate were considered more important. He got his bachelor's degree in 1977 and was ready to join a hospital as a doctor. But this time too, it was Botafogo that made him continue as a professional footballer. And he finally decided to go for football because the money he was getting was much more than he could ever get as a doctor. Even after going as a professional footballer, he did not leave his lifestyle, which included drinking and smoking among other things. He used to call himself anti-athlete, not very fond of training, not making enough sacrifices with his choices or addictions, and even his playing style was more dependent on his intelligence than running on the pitch. By 1978, he became a very popular name and was chased by many top clubs in Brazil for his signature. In 1978, he joined Corinthians, and this is where the real story will start, of the Socrates football world loved and adored. Initially, Socrates was not particularly liked by the fans, as he was not showing enough passion or effort on the pitch, which gave the impression that he did not care about the team. But that did not affect Socrates. He knew his performances would speak for himself, and for that he needed his intelligence and not extra runs. And that happened. Corinthians won the league in 1979. Just after 2 years, Socrates became the captain of Corinthians as well as Brazil football team and went on to captain his country in the 1982 World Cup. But it is what started in the 1982 that made him so special to the fans. Brazil at that time was under a dictatorship run by a military government followed by a coup in 1964. Before joining Corinthians, Socrates was not interested in politics and even called the military government good for his country, although hard to say if it was support or just a public view to avoid any controversy. He still did not like the similar fashion or dictatorship style in how the football clubs were run, and how the game was becoming more robotic and controlled by a few individuals. Socrates never liked the inequalities and discrimination in the society, which are not completely out in the football world too. From the 1980s, he started leaning more towards the left and supporting democracy. Socrates believed democracy was needed everywhere, including the team he was playing for. A change was needed. Just to make you fully informed, while I went through various sources for this video, but for the specific part I'm going to discuss on Corinthians football structure, a significant change and impact of Socrates on a bigger stage, I have relied heavily on Matthew Short's journal article Playing Soccer in Brazil, Socrates, Corinthians and Democracy, which was published in the Wilson Quarterly 1976. And in addition to it, I used other sources to add more context or to understand and explain it better with more information. Corinthians had always been a historic and successful football club, and was known as a club of the working class, in contrast to Sao Paulo, which was often associated with the elites. However, these values of the club were not reflected in how it was being operated at the time. The club was run in a very centralized manner. Corinthians were in principle governed by the club members. They elected a body of councillors, who in turn selected administrators. But the resulting regime was less democratic than it sounds. The The positions were usually given to wealthy businessmen who had made hefty contributions to the club. Once in power, these cartolas or top hats tended to stay in power, and not for altruistic reasons. The cartolas used their positions of influence to forge alliances with leaders of military, the judicial system, and the government. Lord Attel, to cite one example, skillfully made his way from the presidency of Sao Paulo Football Club to the governorship of Sao Paulo. In the 1982 elections, two sides were competing for presidency of the club: Order and Truth and Corinthian Democracy. Order and Truth were for traditional centralized control, and standing for presidency from this side was Vicente Matthews, former club president. The Corinthian Democracy, on the other hand, was standing as a movement for political liberation, promising a new form of team administration involving players, administrators, and even fans. The presidency of the Corinthians was once considered the third most important position in the country, after the governor of Sao Paulo and president of the country. Many people, including several players, publicly supported the Corinthian Democracy, in the hope of a more democratic regime governing the club. Captain Socrates even promised that he would retire from the sport if Order and Truth won. In the end, Corinthian Democracy won, and their candidate, Valdemar Perez, became the president of the club. Adilson Montero Alves, a socialist and owner of a biscuit factory, was appointed as the new director of football. His timing of arrival could not have been better. Socrates was heavily influenced by his social and political values. He started writing columns, participating in discussions, and giving speeches on democracy and socialist values. Corinthian Democracy promised significant changes in the functioning of the club if elected, which they did. But this change was not just going to impact Corinthians, but will have much bigger consequences in the years to come. The new management and Captain Socrates decided to bring democracy to their club. So the director of football Adilson, left back Vladimir, and Captain Socrates, Democracia Corinthiana, a full democracy in the football club. Everything would be decided by votes, not by a single person. In the simplest way to explain, it was the highest level of democracy and participation you can imagine. From team selection to training times, from recruitment to income distribution, and even what they would eat at lunch. Everything was decided by votes. And it was not just limited to players or coaches or board, but every single person working for the club, including a cook or a janitor. As Socrates said, we choose by a simple majority and everyone's vote was absolutely equal to any other vote. A club director meant as much as a reserve goalkeeper. The administrator or masseur was as much a part of the team as me, the captain of the Brazilian national team. And this gave us an incredible shared sense of complicity, of the independence of everyone within a single team. It not only led to great harmony in the team and a clear direction, but also made the connection with the fans much stronger and got their unconditional support. And the positive effects of this change were also visible on the pitch. Corinthians won the league in 1982 and 1983, the first time they won back-to-back titles in more than 30 years. Democracia Corinthiana soon became a movement, and not only Corinthians players and local fans, it is now getting nationwide attention and support from the masses. One of their most iconic moments came in 1983, when Corinthians won the Sao Paulo Championship and players carried a banner on the pitch saying, "Win or lose, but always with democracy." Socrates was now publicly talking about communism and social equality, raising demand for free elections and bringing back the democracy in Brazil. Soon Corinthians democracy was joined by citizens across the country, sparking nationwide calls for democracy and an elected government. As initially started just as democratic movement for a club, the military government could not do anything against them. And by the time they realized its influence on the entire country, they knew their days were numbered. What was more important was that they never promoted any particular side in their campaigns, but were just asking everyone to vote and bring back the democracy to the country. The movement had the backing of artists, journalists, and intellectuals. By 1984, protests were erupting in various regions of the country, demanding the right for citizens to vote and choose their president. In 1984, Socrates gave a speech to a crowd of around 2 million people, calling for direct elections now. Corinthian democracy reached its peak at the April 1984 free election rally in Sao Paulo. The rally was held just a few days before the congressional vote on the constitutional amendment to re-establish free elections in the nation. Socrates, speaking before some 500,000 people, pledged that if the amendment passed, he would refuse $1 million offer to play in Italy and stay in Brazil to participate in the rebuilding of democracy. That did not happen, and he joined the Italian club Fiorentina in 1984. While no democratic elected party came into the power during Socrates' Corinthians time. But a year after his departure, the military government stepped down when they lost to opposition in the elections and a democratically elected government came into the power in 1985. Socrates also came back to Brazil, but this time Flamengo. And his old beloved Corinthians have also been changed. The democracy brought into the club by Socrates and company no longer exists after losing the free election campaign. Despite the country is now free from dictatorship, and this is the club where this movement started and led to such a huge impact on the country in both politics and football. Socrates spent the rest of his career at Flamengo, then Santos, and finally went back to his former club Botafogo and retired there in 1989. Socrates' career may not look as impressive purely from the lens of footballing achievements for a talent like him, but that's what differentiated Socrates from others. He refused to leave his lifestyle and habits for a better footballing career, which can be attributed to his contribution to starting Democracia Corinthiana. This can also be understood from his quote on Corinthians: "That was the greatest team I ever played in because it was more than sport. My political victories are more important than my victories as a professional player." A match finishes in 90 minutes, but life goes on. Socrates practiced medicine after retiring from football. He also wrote for various newspapers and magazines on not just football but many issues related to politics and economy. Also appeared as pundit on many shows. He was not afraid to share his opinion on something in public or criticize anyone irrespective of reaction. In one of his final columns titled "Some Dreams, Other Don't," Socrates took on Pele for not speaking out against racism in world football. This was not the only time he criticized Pele for not speaking against racism. Certainly all in the planet felt attacked except for one, Pele. Socrates wrote, "One thing we know for sure, Pele has never had a dream." Nothing is more endemic in addition to corruption than racism among those in football management. He wrote on racism in football and FIFA corruption when FIFA president Sepp Blatter was in the news for corruption charges. His personal life was also not free from the troubles or chaos. He married 4 times, divorced 3 times, and had 6 children. Socrates continued drinking even in his 50s and refused to stay clean, irrespective of his health conditions. By 2011, years of heavy drinking finally caught up with Socrates. His liver suffered, leading to cirrhosis, and a lengthy stay in the hospital. He passed away on 4 December 2011 due to food poisoning. In his final writing, Socrates criticized Brazil's preparation for hosting 2014 World Cup and 2016 Olympics. He saw poor people unfairly pushed out of their homes to make way for fancy stadiums. Socrates believed this public money should have gone towards education and helping everyday Brazilians, not lining the pockets of the rich. Socrates will always be remembered as more than just a great footballer. He was a doctor, a voice for the voiceless, and a person who did not buy someone else's idea on how to live his life or fulfill his talents. Apart from being an exceptional footballer and one of the greatest players of his generation, with all his footballing talent and career, Socrates will always be remembered as one of the biggest unsung heroes of the football world and a true icon of the game.